Welcome to Candlelight Mysteries, a place where shadows whisper secrets and every flicker of the flame hides a tale untold. Tonight, beneath the glow of a single candle, we will journey into a story filled with suspense, secrets, and timeless intrigue. Before we begin, I'd love to know a little about you. Where are you listening from, and what drew you to the world of mysteries? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's build a circle of mystery lovers together. If you enjoy tonight's tale, don't forget to subscribe and join our growing Candlelight Mysteries family. Here, every flame carries a story waiting just for you. Now let us step quietly into the darkness and begin. Chapter 1. The café at dusk Paris kept its promises in the hour before night. The lamps blinked on one by one, little gold coins paying a debt to the streets, while shopfronts drew their curtains of steam and reflection. Rain had passed moments earlier, leaving the boulevard du Montparnasse shining as if the city had been freshly lacquered. In the window of Café La Clarté, a figure sat so perfectly arranged that the café itself seemed to copy his posture, the cups aligned, sugar tongs centered, the brass rail polished to a mirror. Hercule Poirot, hat set neatly on the chair beside him, contemplated a cup of thick chocolate with the attention he might grant a witness who claimed to have seen everything. His cuffs were pristine. The crease of his trousers maintained a moral authority, and the celebrated moustache, curled like quotation marks around a sentence the world never quite finished understanding, shone with discreet pride. "Chocolate," he remarked to no one in particular, "is the most civilized of beverages. It promises warmth and delivers it." Madame Colette Arnaud, proprietress, wiped the lip of the sugar jar in careful, clockwise motions, never anti-clockwise. Habit, Poirot knew, is the shawl in which character keeps warm. She glanced toward the door, where a poster had been pasted with a touch of bohemian carelessness. Carnets de Montparnasse, private letters, and memoranda, 1890-1910, beneath in an ambassadorial hand, curated with the assistance of Sir Reginald Pembroke, KCMG, the bottom edge lifted slightly, letting in a sly draught. At the next table, the painter Marc Delon smoked a cigarette with the sincerity of an actor playing a painter. Blue had stained his fingertips. A smear of ultramarine made a crescent moon at his cuff. "Private letters," he announced to his wine-glass, "should remain privately illiterate." "Come now, monsieur," said Madame Colette, depositing tartlets with military placement. "Without letters, what would poets burn to keep themselves warm?" "Receipts," Marc replied, and grinned at his own bitterness. The doorbell chimed and admitted the Countess Eleanor de Vries on the arm of evening. She wore sable at her wrists because she enjoyed the idea of winter more than winter itself. A suggestion of violets hung about her. Behind her limped René Valette, the valet whose humility manifested not in silence, but in perfectly attentive distance. He carried a round hat box, its ribbon the color of a new cream. At the far banquette, an American girl with an upturned collar wrote in a small notebook. Left-handed, her letters leaning confidently into the future. Miss Iris Cabot, the café had already learned, for she introduced herself with the speed of friendship. She ordered café crème in enthusiastic French that made Madame Colette purse her mouth and soften her eyes at the same time. Sir Reginald Pembroke, immaculate, arrived just as the rain returned to tap diplomatic signals on the window. His tie knot reflected an empire's discipline. "Madame," he said to Colette, "a brandy with a conical indulgence." Rock sugar was his weakness. He liked to pretend it was a vice rather than a sweet tooth. Colette's spoon hovered over the sugar tray. Poirot saw it, the smallest hesitation, one gap between the crystalline cones, like a tooth missing in a perfect smile. She rearranged the others with a smoothing gesture and carried the tray to the counter. Poirot felt, rather than heard, Inspector Lucien Moreau passed by outside. The inspector's stride possessed a decent skepticism. He tipped his hat toward Poirot through the fogged pane and continued on, escorted by his own patients. Conversation arranged itself around Sir Reginald like furniture. Marc Delon offered a toast that carried too much paint thinner. To the gallery and its courage in printing what should never be read. To history, Sir Reginald answered pleasantly. It is a mirror. It does not apologize for faces, the Countess's smile slanted. Mirrors can be tilted, or broken, Mark added. Iris looked up, eyes bright. Is it true the exhibition includes letters no one has seen for decades? Artists, politicians, secret payments, secret meetings? She tried to sound casual. A reporter's curiosity wears a summer hat but carries a winter knife. Gossip, Sir Reginald replied. And even if true, harmless. Past shamelessness is the safest commodity in Paris. Unless it becomes present, murmured Poirot. René Valette set the hat box carefully on a chair. As he adjusted the Countess's umbrella, an envelope slid from beneath the ribbon, skated under Poirot's table, and stopped at the toe of his patent leather shoe. He retrieved it with delicate thumb and forefinger. The seal, a small disc of wax, showed a winged figure with one wing broken. A heraldic conceit or a private joke? Madame, he said, and offered the envelope. Eleanor de Vries took it without the interested glance such an object usually commands. Merci, Monsieur Poirot. She slipped it into the hat box with the ease of a magician replacing a coin. The café resumed its rhythms. Yet the absence on the sugar tray continued to shine in Poirot's mind like an empty frame. He paid, placed coins aligned like a neat constellation, and stood to leave. At the door he glanced back. Sir Reginald lifted his brandy. On the surface a crescent cloud had formed, not the mark of a mouth, but of something lowered and lifted again, a faint milkiness tremoring where a lump of sugar had just kissed the liquor. He stepped into the drizzle. Paris smelled of iron and bread. Somewhere a clock mistook its duty and struck an imaginary hour. The error lodged itself in Poirot's hearing. He turned a little, as if to include you in his confidence. What detail would you have noticed in this moment? The gap in the sugar tray? The left-handed script in Iris's notebook? The broken-winged seal? Or the way Madame Colette's apology travelled by mouth while her eyes counted Sir Reginald's brandy like an accountant balancing a past debt? The rain paused. History shifted its weight from one foot to the other. In a hat box, an envelope prepared itself to be a hinge. Chapter 2. The preview at Galerie Valadon. The Galerie Valadon perched above a cobbler's shop and carried itself like a small duchess visiting a larger court. Brass railings glowed. Velvet ropes domesticated space. The parquet floor whispered under shoes that had practiced being important. Auguste Valadon, anxious and blinking, hosted in the manner of a man auditioning for his own opening. In the central room, a vitrine exhibited the Carnet de Montparnasse, letters and notebooks like captive birds arranged under glass. A railway timetable to the Gare Montparnasse, 1895, lay beside a numbered studio map. A photograph of the celebrated locomotive catastrophe, engine erupting through the station's facade, nose planted in the street, commanded the corner, absurd and grand. Patrons swarmed politely. Sir Reginald guided a cluster of donors, the words context and legacy glinting whenever he turned his head. The Countess Elena drifted in his orbit with a mild smile that confessed nothing and forgave much. René hovered at appropriate distance, hands folded, limp, neatly calibrated. Poirot walked the perimeter, allowing the room to confess its small untidiness. The crooked accent on a wall card, carnet, was an error masquerading as style. He tucked the information where he kept useful sloppiness. Iris Cabot paced alongside him, notebook ready. "Say," she whispered, "do you suppose the locomotive is here to warn us nothing stays on the rails? "Ah," said Poirot, "you have a taste for symbol." "Be careful, mademoiselle. Symbolism is an intoxicant. It makes one see double and confess things not yet true." She smiled. "So does Paris." Madame Colette supervised a refreshment table with the severity of a schoolmistress guarding a piano. Tartlets stood in regimented rows. The rock sugar delivered earlier sparkled in a crystal bowl, though Poirot observed the bowl had recently been disturbed. The missing cone had not reappeared. Inspector Lucien Moreau arrived in evening coat, invited for reassurance rather than protection. He shook Poirot's hand with dry humour. "In case anyone murders a canapé," he said. "Or a reputation," Poirot returned. "The victims bleed longer." A hush, like a gust of velvet, passed through the gallery as the lights dimmed. Valadon clapped. "Friends, a short projection, photographs of old Montparnasse to set our mood." The mechanical whir stirred the air. For a moment the lights failed entirely, darkness took a crisp breath, and in that silence, from the library at the side, came a small sound. Metal, kissing stone. A weight set down or dropped. When the lights returned, the projector woke obediently onto the white screen. The locomotive's famous leap filled the room with antique surprise. People exhaled laughter at their own startlement. Sir Reginald had excused himself moments earlier to take a telephone call in the library. He did not reappear. Valadon, jittery with hostly antennae, noticed first. He went to the library door, called softly, pushed it, and then reeled back as if a draught had struck him from inside. "Monsieur Poirot," he whispered, as a man whispers to a priest at a party. Inspector Moreau arrived beside. C or EC, depending on bias and light. Beneath the desk, he glimpsed half a ticket stub. He filed everything as he found it, not only the objects but the order of their confessions. "Window?" said Moreau. "Secured," Poirot replied. "Door? Ajar, not forced." He looked at the skirting board where the diplomat's head had come to rest. The wood bore a faint, older smudge, grease paint perhaps, unrelated to death, but married to the room's vanity. Moreau straightened slowly. "Cyanide," he said, not yet as a conclusion, but as the ghost of one. "I smell it. The almond is a gossip," Poirot agreed. "We must treat it with caution. Sometimes it repeats a story that is true." They returned to the main room. Moreau's voice, calm and courteous, requested that no one leave. Polite horror assembled itself. Poirot watched how people made space for their shock. The Countess Elena touched her pearls, a gesture of either reassurance or apology. René's lips moved, perhaps in prayer. Marc Delon stared with the frankness of a man who plans to paint grief later. Iris Cabot's pen began to move. Reporters write even when their souls hesitate. They gathered statements as the projector's reel clicked at the end of its loop. An absurd applause. Elena de Vries spoke first. "Velvet over iron." She had visited the ladies' salon when the lights dimmed, returned to the vitrine, and noticed nothing except, yes, a waft of tobacco in the door to the library ajar. "I am not much for brandy," she added, glancing toward the tray. "Men like to sweeten their one courage with another." René Valet's account was exact without being useful. He had carried a folded note at Valadon's request to Sir Reginald earlier in the evening. The gentleman had asked René to leave it on the desk. After that he had assisted Madame Colette. "I carry trays," he said with humble accuracy. His limp, more pronounced now, announced a history he did not volunteer. Marc Delon shrugged like a man throwing off the idea of guilt. "I was smoking. I dropped my match case, perhaps. I pick it up. If I hated the Englishman, it was a pure and theoretical hatred. I am too French for practical hatred." Iris Cabot confessed to clumsiness, which she wore as a style. She had walked near the library during the dimming, tripped, torn a theatre ticket, and sworn softly at her own feet. "I'm left-handed," she added cheerfully when Poirot asked. "It's a scandal." Madame Colette, every inch the general of pastry, offered precision. She had noticed one sugar cone was missing before service. She had compensated with tartlets and patience. "And I keep my poisons in the bottle marked vinegar," she said crisply. "Which is to say—" "I do not keep them at all." When the room had calmed enough to pretend to breathe, Poirot returned to the library, let his eyes walk the carpet, and asked himself the question you might ask also. If the brandy was not poisoned in the bottle, how did the poison touch the drinker? He considered the milky crescent on the rim. The rock sugar ritual, the fact, observed, not yet explained, that the missing cone had left the tray earlier than it should have. On his way out, he paused by the crooked poster. He straightened it with 2 careful fingers and smiled without humour. "There," he said softly. "We must correct what is careless, if only to see what remains deliberately wrong." He stepped back into the murmurous gallery. All around him were fragments of other people's yesterdays, shouting politely from behind glass. Outside, the rain recommenced with the good manners of a reliable friend. What detail would you have noticed in that small room? The glove? The ticket torn left-handed? The brandy's ghostly crescent? Poirot noticed them all, but also the thing that was not there, a trace of panic. Whoever had done this believed in rehearsal. Chapter 3. The Circle. Closes. Inspector Moreau sealed the gallery with a competence that neither alarmed nor reassured. It simply happened. Patrons settled into antechambers with the stunned gratitude of survivors of a minor shipwreck. Madame Colette summoned waiters and dignity. Tartlets retreated into tins. Gossip advanced in careful couplings. Poirot and Moreau worked in tandem, not like opposites, but like instruments in different registers. The library became a stage for testimony. "Madame la Comtesse," said Moreau, opening his notebook. "Your movements, if you please." Eleanor de Vries made of her account a gentle aria. Projection announced. A brief visit to the salon. A return to the vitrine of letters where she admired not the letters, but their reflections. "I noted the door to that little room was ajar," she said, eyes soft. "And how do you say?" A breath of tobacco and violets. Poirot, who had catalogued scents and their impostors, wondered. Violets belonged to Elena, heliotrope to Iris. The library had smelled of both almond and violets when they entered. A mixture suggests either crowding or disguise. René Valette stepped forward and stood as a man stands, who knows standing is his profession. He had delivered a note earlier, he said, and placed it on Sir Reginald's desk. Then he had assisted Madame Colette with trays, as half the city could attest. "I do not leave my mistress," he finished, bowing his head toward Elena with an affection scrubbed of impropriety. Marc Delon arrived with theatrical impatience. "I was in the corridor attempting to coax a cigarette into agreeing with me," he announced. "If I had intended a murder, I should have arranged better lighting." "You had quarrelled with Sir Reginald?" Poirot observed mildly. "We exchanged philosophies," Marc corrected. "He believed history is a ledger. I believe it is a confession." "You see the difference?" Iris Cabot's turn brought a slant of sunlight to the desk in spite of midnight. "I am a tourist with a typewriter," she began, then reddened. "Well, a tourist plus—" I tripped when the lights went out. "Half my ticket is probably under your desk. I'm left-handed, yes, and it makes me tear things crooked and smear ink, and people say it's charming, which is how they forgive things." "Left-handedness is a left turn at many corners," said Poirot. "It is also a detail that sometimes points too eagerly." She tilted her chin, amused and wary. "So I'm interesting." "You are," he said, "and that is not always fortunate." Madame Colette entered as if summoned by conscience. "What you require from me is simple," she announced. I prepared what I always prepare. One cone of rock sugar was missing when I opened the box. I adjusted. I saw no one behave criminally, though I saw many behave foolishly. "You thought poorly of the dead man," Moreau said without tone. "I am French," said Colette. We think poorly of many things and still serve them dessert. Valadon concluded the parade with limp despair. My gallery, my reputation, will improve, Poirot said kindly. Society loves to be frightened so long as it is not in danger. When the last chair had creaked and the last alibi finished tying its shoelaces, Poirot examined what remained. The glove on the floor was not the Countess's. Her monogram differed. The ticket half under the desk matched Iris's stub. The match-case Mark had casually lost bore his initials, yes, but fell exactly where a man might kneel to retrieve something else. And the brandy glass? The brandy glass wore its crescent as serenely as the moon a poet refuses to share. Doctor? Moreau asked when the medical officer had bent and frowned and sniffed and frowned again. Cyanide, the doctor confirmed curtly. Traces on the lips and at the glass rim, nothing in the brandy itself. He likely lifted a piece of sugar, or someone did, touched with poison, then lifted it away before it dissolved. Quick, neat, ugly.
Quick, neat, ugly, Poirot repeated.
A motto for too much of modern life. He left the library only to wander, apparently idly, among the vitrines. A letter with a too-even fold suggested the curator's hand rather than an original crease. A ledger page displayed sums beside initials. A strip of translucent paper obscured the names, tantalizing as a half-raised veil. Sir Reginald, collector, curator, and perhaps accountant of other people's shame, had assembled an archive whose utility did not stop at history. Blackmail is merely memory monetized. Back at the refreshment table, Poirot watched Madame Colette restack saucers. She saved everything worth saving. She discarded nothing sentimental. Madame, he said gently, your late husband, he served with the army as a photographer? Her hand paused. Yes, she said, and the single syllable held a countryside of feeling. He made images of bridges. He believed a bridge is a prayer the earth makes to itself.
What is this to your dead Englishman? Perhaps nothing, said Poirot.
Perhaps the beginning of something. He stepped outside briefly to breathe a Paris that was rinsed and weary. Moreau came to stand beside him. You have a shape? The inspector asked, eyes forward. I have an outline, Poirot replied. It includes a young woman with two hands clever enough to be either. A painter who leaves colour where fingers refuse to confess. A countess who travels under a name that fits but does not belong. A valet who knows engineering chemicals though he carries hat boxes. And a widow who remembers a war photograph that should never have been kept. The dead man sat in the centre and spun them all like a spider who writes invoices, Moreau grunted.
And the sugar?
Poirot smiled faintly. Always the sugar. It is sweetness that betrays us. They returned to the library. Poirot knelt at the skirting board where Sir Reginald's head had come to rest. The old grease-paint smudge he had noticed earlier still marked the varnish. He touched it with a folded handkerchief. The faint colour lifted. A party some weeks ago, he murmured, with theatricals in this very room. Someone leaned there, painted and giggling. Tonight our diplomat found the same spot with greater consequence. Rooms, Inspector, carry their own diaries. Moreau closed his notebook. Then tomorrow. Tomorrow we will ask the wholesaler of sugar why one cone went missing, and the printer why the posters misplace an accent. And then I shall trouble our suspects for a little play in which they will perform their guilt or their innocence by inches. He looked back at you as if you walked with him down the corridor. What detail would you have tied to your finger so as not to forget? The clouded rim? The wrong accent? The envelope's broken wing? I, Hercule Poirot, knot them all together. A rope of small fibres will hold more strongly than one grand cable. Order and method, mes amis. Always. Chapter 4. Boxes within boxes. Paris woke with the self-importance of a city that believes it has already had every sensation and yet expects a new one by noon. The morning after the gallery preview, the boulevard wore last night's gossip like a scarf. Shop shutters blinked awake. A newspaper boy shouted in a key that did not belong to any church. A pale sun-rehearsed warmth without promising it. Poirot returned to Café La Clarté because he believed in habit as a means of coaxing truth to the surface. Routine, he often said, is the stage on which character forgets it is being watched. Madame Colette poured his coffee without asking, which is the apex of civilization. He lifted the cup, admired the evenness of the crema, and then set it down without tasting. Coffee must be earned by an answer, and the morning had not yet paid. "Madame," he said gently, "tell me again about the rock sugar." She braced her hands on the counter as though pushing against yesterday. It arrived in a dozen cones, each wrapped like a small wedding present. When I opened the package to check for breakage, there were 11 and a ghost. One cone had left a crystal dust like the trail of a departing saint. I said a French word that is not in the catechism, rearranged the rest, and told myself Auguste Valadon would not notice. He notices nothing until it shouts. "You kept the dust?" Poirot asked. "I keep everything," she said, offended at the banality of the question. From beneath the counter, she produced a folded brown paper. On it, a small glitter of sugar crystals that held light the way certain people hold attention. "For glaze on cakes," she added, with a shrug that forgave himself for thrift. "Merci, madame." Poirot slipped the paper into his pocketbook as tenderly as a lover would press a lock of hair. "One more question. Who delivered the sugar?" "A wholesaler in the Rue de l'Ombre. Good jacket, slick hair, honest face. He has a wife who counts spoons using both hands." Poirot's mouth made a small figure that was not quite a smile. He left coins aligned, hat exact, and walked south under a sky that had the colour of a peeled almond. The wholesaler presented himself with the bland pride of a man who sells the materials of sweetness without the guilt of eating them. "Indeed, monsieur," he said when asked. "One cone cracked in transit. I removed a fragment with the delicacy of a surgeon so that your Madame Colette should not accuse me of slovenliness. I placed it in a bowl on my desk, and then later, in a fit of domestic diplomacy, I carried the piece to La Clarté. My wife says I am a hypocrite about sugar. I answer that marriage is a series of appropriate hypocrisies." "Très bien," said Poirot. He was interested less in the sermon than in the route, wholesaler to pocket to café. The missing cone had a history now, and histories accumulate fingerprints of a sort. From there, he went to the little printing shop that birthed the gallery's posters. A boy with ink on his ear confessed to the misplaced accent with the magnificent hopelessness of youth. "I am learning. I will not miss it next time." "See that you miss only accents and not lives," Poirot said, not unkindly. He left the shop with the pleasure of having confirmed that some blunders are merely blunders, useful but innocent. Inspector Moreau met him at the gallery's locked door. "Doctor confirms cyanide," the inspector reported. "On the lips and around the rim. None in the decanter or the pitcher of water. We will search Sir Reginald's rooms today, but before that I wish to look, not at the crime, but at the room's vanity." Poirot led Moreau back into the library, which wore its police seal like an accidental brooch. He crouched near the skirting board where the diplomat's head had found the final stillness. "There," he said, tapping with a gloved knuckle. "Grease paint from an old party. A masquerade evening, perhaps. Someone leaned here weeks ago. The room keeps a diary in smudges," Moreau squinted. "You were telling me about past sins while I chase a fresh one." "I am telling you," replied Poirot, "that this room is used to play acting. Last night was a performance of a different kind. They examined the desk not for what it offered, but for what it omitted. No interruption in the dust where a stranger had laid a hand. The telephone receiver sat like an obedient dog. The blotter bore 2 overlapped impressions of Sir Reginald's signature, one recent, one faint, as if he practiced his own name before presenting it. A man who rehearses his signature might also rehearse his secrets. Valadon says Sir Reginald kept certain papers here between visits, Moreau observed. He was dictatorial about his displays. Poirot opened the desk's top drawer with a handkerchief and found only stationery and pride. He closed it. We will find the meat in the man's briefcase, not his desk. The briefcase, when obtained from the embassy by Moreau's men that afternoon, offered resistance in the form of good leather, which is a kind of snobbery, under a flap stitched so carefully that you had to be an obsessive to suspect it. There was another world. Slim ledgers, envelopes of photographs, typed sheets with lists of initials and dates. Over certain names, strips of translucent paper had been pasted, a coy censorship that invited removal. Montconspiracy, read Moreau aloud from a file tab. He abbreviated himself like a government. Montparnasse Conspiracy, Poirot translated with a sigh for melodrama, or simply his own private economy. They read without reading aloud, because some reading is not for sound. The ledger's pattern was monotone but devastating. Small payments made through intermediaries, favours exchanged like chess pieces, entries marked with double strokes where sums became threats. There were artists, patrons, 2 diplomats, a cafe owner, a photographer dead since 1917, and, this made Poirot's head incline, the stage name of a young dancer who had once written love letters with an optimism that deserved pity, not arithmetic. Next to that name, someone had penciled a modern address, blackmail, said Moreau grimly. The old sport, not always for money, Poirot murmured, sometimes for obedience. Control is the cheapest currency. They locked the dossier away. We will call our group together this evening, Moreau said, to clarify timelines. Let us also stage a little theatre, Poirot replied. People confess better when they do not know they are in a confession. He spent the next hour walking the boulevard without purpose, except the most important one, to listen to his thoughts walking next to him. He reflected on Iris Cabot, left-handed and right-handed, scented with heliotrope, a notebook that never quite closed. On Marc Tellon, blue-fingered, furious at being curated. On the Countess, names like dresses chosen to fit.
On René Valette, loyalty that limped but never sat. On Madame Colette, memory hoarded like jam in a cupboard no one else may open. He turned, as he sometimes did, to the invisible listener who kept pace with him. What would you ask of them?
He wondered. What detail in their stories fails to resolve? What note rings a half-tone off? Poirot believed all murders sing. You need only the correct ear to hear the key. That evening he summoned them to the library for a demonstration no more elaborate than a child's game. On the desk he placed a brandy balloon, a crystal bowl of rock sugar, a small carafe of water, and the obelisk paperweight. We will now rehearse the Englishman's ritual, he announced. Forgive me, there is no nationalism in this. It is purely anthropological. He guided each in turn. Mark to lift the sugar with tongs and lower it to the brandy. Iris to step close as if to ask a question and, with her left hand, point to the rim. Madame Colette to approach carrying a tray. The Countess to pause in the doorway. René to deliver a folded note. Poirot walked among them like a conductor counting silent bars. Voila, he said, when the pantomime ended.
In this dance, there is only one moment when a hand can touch the rim unnoticed.
Do you see it?
During the dimming, when curiosity leans forward and courtesy leans back. They saw it.
They pretended not to. Poirot smiled as a fisherman smiles when the line tightens and he feels the truth of the river in his wrist. Merci, he said. Inspector, tomorrow we will close the net. Tonight we will sleep like men who have earned it. Paris outside had recovered its appetite. In a window he saw his reflection, and, beside it, the small, stern moon of the brandy's cloudy crescent. He bowed slightly, as one bows to an adversary he respects. Chapter 5. False trails, Newspapers did not shout so much as purr with satisfaction. Diplomat dead in gallery, the almond sent in Montparnasse. Sketch artists made Sir Reginald more noble than he had been. A columnist with a taste for a moral lamented the decline of discretion while selling it by the inch. Poirot visited Iris Cabot first because she puzzled him in a way that felt personal. She received him in a room that was tidier than its rent, where a typewriter sat like a co-conspirator. On the desk were 2 photographs of a girl in a chorus line, faces from 10 years ago, smiling as though the future had been ordered and would arrive presently with a ribbon. "You came to scold me," Iris said brightly. Because brightness is a shield and she had few others. "I came to observe," said Poirot.
"It is my hobby." She offered coffee, which he declined.
"You are ambidextrous," he continued. "You write left-handed when you want to be seen writing and right-handed when you wish to pass unnoticed. You wear heliotrope, which is the cousin of violet, but not the sister.
"You are not an heiress."
You are a journalist, poor, ambitious, empathetic when it does not cost too much." "Brutal," she said. "But I suppose I asked for that." "You are also angry," Poirot added, "at men who add up women as if affection were a column to be balanced."
"At the way history turns private courage into public entertainment." She sat on the edge of the bed and studied her hands.
"Did you ever want to write something so badly you felt it would stop existing if you didn't?" "I want to arrange things so that they stop hurting," Poirot said. "It is not so noble as writing." "It is only tidier," she laughed. "I saw someone near the library door when the lights went out."
"A shoulder."
"And a scent, violets. Violets travel," Poirot replied. "They do not always indicate a person so much as an intention." "Cryptic," she said. "Is that a Belgian joke?"
"It is a human one." He stood.
"Be careful, Mademoiselle Cabot. You like puzzles enough to pretend you are not part of one." From Iris's pension he crossed to Marc Delon's studio, which looked as if a colour had exploded and then politely apologized. Marc faced a canvas on which geometry mourned. He smoked with the concentration of a man trying not to think. "You believe me a suspect because I am theatrical," Marc began without turning. "But I tell you I have only the temperament of a murderer, not the discipline." "Discipline is overrated," Poirot said. "Tell me, did Sir Reginald threaten you?"
"Not directly."
He did not like directness. He suggested that certain financial records of mine would look poorly in the wrong light. Then he smiled as if he had made a joke. I told him he curates not history but extortion. He said extortion is merely history expedited. "And you left a match case with your initials near the library." "I drop things," Marc said with the grandeur of a confession that wishes to be forgiven by art. "Everyone does," Poirot agreed. "The question is whether you drop them where they help you," Marc turned finally. "Whom do you suspect?" "Everyone," said Poirot cheerfully.
"It gives me such a wealth of possibilities." À la clarté, Madame Colette polished a glass until the glass blushed.
"Is your police friend going to arrest the café?" she asked. "It would be efficient. Everyone comes here eventually." "Inspector Moreau is a socialist of the soul," Poirot said. "He shares the burden equally before assigning it correctly." He set on the counter the brown paper that held the saved sugar dust. "May I keep this?" "Keep it in your life," she said, which in French can be either a blessing or an impatience.
"And your Englishman?"
"Was he a good man?" "He was professional," Poirot answered, which is another way of saying he did not trouble himself with goodness. "Then may God be kinder than I am," said Madame Colette, and went to scold a waiter. By afternoon, Moreau had the embassy files. Together they reviewed Sir Reginald's private ledger. It had the cleanliness of a murder weapon that has been wiped. Under Montparnasse Conspiracy were entries beside initials that could be anyone, EDV,
MDIC, a cafe owner's first letter, a dead photographer's surname,
receipts, appointment notes, instructions to a clerk to telephone certain numbers before a preview. The paper smelled faintly of camphor, the scent of preserved cowardice. "Enough to implicate everyone," Moreau said. "Not enough to exonerate anyone." "Ah," Poirot replied. "The librarian's dream." He closed the file and suggested to Moreau the small supper that evening, the demonstration he had planned. Moreau, who disapproved of theatrics only in theory, agreed. "We will feed them well," he said. "It makes the guilty polite." Before the gathering, Poirot paid one brief visit more, to a basement darkroom behind a photography shop 2 streets from the gallery. The owner, white-haired and meticulously courteous, showed him shelves where bottles stood labelled like monks. "Cyanide for film, developer, fixer." "We keep records," the man said. "Anyone who borrows signs a book."
Except Madame Colette's husband, God rest him, who knew more than all of us and took only what was necessary. "Do you know Miss Iris Cabot?"
Poirot asked casually. The man hesitated. "She came last week to ask about old negatives of chorus girls. She is curious like a cat and twice as nimble. I did not lend her anything dangerous, but a clever girl could persuade an admirer to do so." "Merci," Poirot said. He did not require the proof. He needed only the possibility. Possibility, like yeast, makes a dough rise. That night the gallery looked like a penitent. The lamps were kinder. Valadon wrung his hands less, having discovered that tragedy is good for business if one is not on trial. The table in the front room bore tartlets, wine, and the 2 bowls Poirot had selected, the rock sugar, and, in a second bowl, white cubes of harmless pastilles lightly scented with violets. He wanted the room to remember both sweetness and disguise. "Mesdames, messieurs," he said, when they had gathered, "we will practice together the choreography of last night. Forgive me. I am a poor director, but a stubborn one." They complied because politeness is easier than defiance before dessert. Poirot placed the glass, the sugar, the obelisk, and had them move as he had moved their shadows in his mind all afternoon. When the demonstration ended, he saw in the space between Iris and the brandy the precise inch where guilt had room to act. He almost pitied it. He thanked them, wished them good night, and left with Moreau for the station. The inspector glanced at him sideways. "You have your murderer." "I have," Poirot said, "but that one must let the conscience of Paris walk around the truth for a few more hours. It will arrive at the door of surrender in time." He went home by way of the river. The Seine gave back the city in fractions, lamps, windows, the stubborn moon. Poirot, who trusted wholes more than fractions, let the pieces assemble themselves in the theatre of the little grey cells. When the curtain rose, the cast stood in their places as he had placed them. He slept like a man who has not yet forgiven the world, but intends to. Chapter 6. The trap with sugar-it is one thing to suspect, another to demonstrate without indecency. Poirot liked his revelations like his collars, clean, precise, and not too tight. He asked Inspector Moreau for an hour in the gallery's front room before the official interviews resumed. Moreau, who had learned the value of a tidy show, nodded. On a round table, Poirot arranged his props with the nicety of a sacristan. A large brandy glass,
a decanter, a crystal bowl of rock sugar, fresh,
counted, a second bowl with the violet-scented pastilles, a small vial marked poison, in truth, water-coloured faintly yellow, and the obelisk paperweight. He also placed a folded square of linen and a pair of sugar. Tongs polished until they behaved when the suspects arrived, though he disliked that word for people not yet diminished by proof. He greeted each with a civility that left them no defence except their best manners. Madame Colette came in her afternoon apron, inevitably clean. The Countess Elena wore a day dress that made of morning light a compliment. René followed with the modesty that is its own pride.
Marc Delon, coat slung over his shoulder like defiance.
And Iris Cabot in a navy frock that announced intention rather than apology. "Mes amis," Poirot began, "we reenact a sacrament of the English soul. Observe." He poured a thimble of brandy, more aroma than drink. Sir Reginald liked his with a piece of rock sugar. The sugar is dipped thus, and when the glass is raised, a crescent cloud forms. If, however, someone lifts the lump away, the crescent remains where the liquid trembled a first time. He did so. The milky arc bloomed on the rim like a shy moon. He handed the glass to Mark. "You are our sommelier of scandal. Show us the ritual exact." Mark, amused in spite of himself, took the tongs, dipped the sugar, lifted it. Poirot stopped him with a raised finger. "Here is the dangerous moment. A hand may touch the rim in pretense of assisting, of pointing, of admiration." He looked at Iris. "Mademoiselle, step as you did," curiosity leaning in. Iris obeyed, perhaps to prove she was unafraid. Her left hand hovered, a small pale bird, over the glass. Poirot watched the distance between fingertip and brim with a concentration that felt like pity. He placed the obelisk on the table where it had fallen the night before, an echo placed exactly. "And now," he said brightly, "we add the theatre." He held up the vial. "Pretend, if you will, that this is our villain, a solution of cyanide.
Touch the rim with a moistened finger and poof!
Death acquires a taste." He dabbed the linen on the rim instead, not wishing to alarm Madame Colette into excommunication. The linen took a faint yellow, theatrical but eloquent. "Why all this?" Mark muttered. "We know the method." "Because," Poirot replied, "I prefer the criminal to discover that I know not only his method, but his reason. People who commit murder for money have the decency of predictability. People who commit murder for righteousness are more dangerous. They believe they have improved the world." He set down the vial and faced Iris. "Mademoiselle Cabot, you came to Paris to write. You discovered in Sir Reginald's private cabinet not only a conspiracy to sell scandal, but a page that concerned your mother, a dancer, very young, from a Montparnasse revue. She wrote letters to a man who did not deserve them. Sir Reginald kept copies or acquired them later and, as recently as last month, used them to bend you. You were to provide him advance notice of any article that might cast him in a difficult light. When you hesitated, he sent you a paragraph about your mother and the arithmetic he had made of her. It was an invitation to obedience. You refused the invitation." Iris's mouth softened, then sharpened.
"I refused," she said.
The admission was not confession. It was a moral stake in the ground. You learned from René Valette, kindly, without malice, the diplomat's habits, Poirot continued, that he would take a private call in the library at precisely the moment of the dimming. You acquired a small vial of cyanide, not from the shopkeeper directly perhaps, but from a gentleman admirer to whom you described a photographic experiment. You dipped a lump of rock sugar as the lights fell, and with your left hand you lifted it away before it dissolved. With your right hand, gloved in a costume piece dusted with violet scent, you touched the brim, carrying the poison where lips must go. You dropped Marc Delong's match case where it would paint a temper. You let your theatre ticket tear advertise your left-handedness. You straightened your face and walked back into the gallery as if you had remembered a better
alibi. The room held stillness.
The way a violin holds a note after the bow.
"Has left the string." Moreau stepped forward.
With the quiet authority of the state. "Mademoiselle," he said, "your handbag." Iris did not resist. From a hidden fold, Moreau withdrew a tiny glass vial, empty, but when the inspector lifted it to his nose, he frowned.
"Almond." "Bad evidence," Iris said evenly.
"A smell is not a signature." "No," Poirot agreed. "But roots matter. The missing sugar piece travelled from wholesaler to Madame Colette by way of his pocket. Your curiosity itch sent you to that wholesaler yesterday to ask how rock sugar is wrapped. You left a flake of moulding dust on your sleeve."
"I saw it. You see everything," Iris said.
And for the first time there was grief in her admiration. "I see enough," Poirot answered. Madame Colette, who had stood like a church that has survived bombardment, crossed herself lightly.
"I do not condone murder," she said.
"But I do not weep for the Englishman." "Nor do I," Poirot murmured. "Only for the necessity that someone believed she had." Iris looked at the window where afternoon made a polite exit. "He would have ruined her," she said softly.
Not me, my mother.
She has a husband now who is kind. He does not need certain arithmetic read to him. I wanted to stop Sir Reginald from curating her shame. And so you curated his death, said Poirot. Efficiently, cleverly, tragically, she drew a breath as if preparing to dive. Very well, she said to Moreau. Yes. It was not a word of surrender so much as a refusal to conceal. The inspector inclined his head, respectful. We will go, mademoiselle. Before they left, Iris turned to Poirot. If I had asked you, she said, what detail would you have noticed first? What would you say? The absinthe on the tray, he replied. Always the missing sweetness. Her smile was crooked and brave. And I, the crooked poster. Then we are both in love with neatness, he said. She walked out between Moreau and the door, as if the corridor were a photograph that would last longer than regret. Chapter 7. The broken wing when...
A murder has been confessed. Cities like Paris pretend to be finished with it.
They are not. The ripples in the glass continue far beyond the thrown stone. Poirot, who distrusted momentum, sat alone in the library that evening and allowed the minor waves to reveal what else they might carry. On the desk, among the papers Moreau had left in sealed envelopes, lay the small wax seal that had slipped from an envelope in a hat box, a winged figure with one wing broken. He held it to the light. Broken wings occur in heraldry and in life for different reasons, once from battle, once from clumsiness. But this wing had been snapped deliberately. Why carry such a symbol unless one wished to remember an injury and make of it a credential? René Valette knocked softly on the doorframe. Monsieur Poirot, he said, almost timid. You wish to see me? I do, Poirot gestured to a chair. René sat as a man sits when he doubts he is allowed to sit at all. You told Mademoiselle Cabot the diplomat's habits, Poirot began. Do you know what she intended? I am not stupid, René said, and the words contained a rustle of anger he had not intended to show. I knew she wanted to stop him.
I did not know how.
I did not ask. You wear a soldier's limp, Poirot observed.
Engineers?
Yes, bridges and the destruction of bridges, which is a blasphemy I still repent. The Comtesse took me into service after the war, when the world had no more use for my hands. And your loyalty is to her. René lifted his chin. To whoever needs it and deserves it in that order. Poirot nodded approval, as if awarding a certificate. The seal, he said, showing the broken wing. Whose? René's mouth made the smallest motion. It is an old emblem from the de Vries family, her husband's family. She kept one envelope as a joke, as if to say she would one day fly on her own and leave his wing behind. You are fond of symbols? Poirot said, amused. I am fond of honesty, René replied. Symbols sometimes are the only polite way to say honest things in public. The Countess Elena entered then, summoned by telepathy or by the intuition of women who know where conversations become dangerous. She took in the room, the posture of the two men, the seal in Poirot's hand. If there is another confession required, she said calmly, I will make it. I am not a countess except by marriage and convenience. Sir Reginald knew and found it useful to remind me. He liked women to be indebted. He called it chivalry. He lent you money?
Poirot asked. He arranged papers.
He made introductions. I repaid him with gossip that no longer hurt anyone, or so I thought. She looked at René with the rarest kind of fondness, one that does not claim. When he asked me 2 weeks ago for information about a journalist asking questions, I told him she was young and foolish and dangerous to herself. He laughed. I should have known then. You did not conspire in his death, Poirot said softly. No, Elena answered. I merely conspired in my own self-respect. It is not a crime, but it can be an accomplice. Poirot set the seal down. I will say to the police that your part in this is administrative vanity and nothing worse. Merci, she said, almost smiling.
And you, Monsieur Poirot, do you believe in conspiracies? I believe in habits, he said.
They kill more efficiently. He walked them both to the door and, after they had gone, sat again with the habit of thinking. The ledger weighed on his mind, not just the entries and sums, the impulse behind them to convert human frailty into accounts receivable. The true conspiracy, he thought, was not in Montparnasse at all. It was in the ordinary heart, which wishes to profit from what it can categorize. He looked up to find Madame Colette in the doorway, holding a parcel wrapped in brown paper.
"For you," she said briskly.
"It is something that belongs to yesterday, and I will not keep it." Inside, neatly tied, lay the fragment of rock sugar from her counter, Madame's souvenir she had pretended not to keep. It glinted like a miniature cathedral of frost. "You see," she said, misreading his surprise, "I am less virtuous than I like to think." "You are more honest," Poirot answered. "Which is very different." She hesitated, then added in a smaller voice, "My husband took a photograph once of a bridge they were building. It was forbidden, but the officer said the light would never be that good again. He sent a print to his brother. Later, someone said the Germans had seen the negatives after all. Do you think a photograph can kill a man a year afterward?" "Yes," Poirot said, "but only if a worse man chooses to carry it. Things are not guilty. We are guilty with them." She nodded as if something in her had been blessed.
"Then I will go back to cubes," she declared, and left with her dignity like a cape. When Poirot finally rose, he felt the case settling into its proper shelves. Iris Cabot would be charged.
The Countess and Renée would go on in a companionship that resisted naming. Marc Delong would paint grief that buyers would call courageous. Valadon would sell catalogue copies stamped with a black band of tasteful mourning. Madame Colette would scold waiters into good behaviour. The embassy would conduct a quiet house cleaning and then host a reception with better wine. And Poirot, he would polish his moustache and see to it that the ledger reached a private archive where someday a scholar would pronounce moral judgments as if they were dates on a spine. He looked at the broken-winged seal one last time and slipped it into an envelope of his own. Some symbols deserve retirement. Chapter 8. Order and method. 1 week passed. Paris decided, as she always does, that scandal is tolerable if it improves conversation. The Gallery Valadon reopened under a discreet cloud of fame. People came to stare at the vitrines and to be seen staring. The Carnet de Montparnasse acquired an aura that history alone could not have given them. Poirot and Inspector Moreau sat at their usual table by the café window, two men joined by the unromantic comradeship of work competently done. Madame Colette placed before them coffee and 2 tartlets that had nothing to confess. "She has made a statement without embroidery," Moreau said, meaning Iris Cabot. "No melodrama. She told the judge exactly what she told us. A case like this, jury will find it poignant and still do their duty." "Justice is at its best when it is not theatrical," Poirot said, "though I admit I prefer my explanations with a little scenery." "You always arrange a fine stage." Moreau smiled, then sobered.
"The embassy is stung."
"They will put the ledger where sunlight does not reach. Let them," Poirot answered. "Sunlight is not the only disinfectant. Sometimes neglect is kinder." They ate in companionable quiet. Outside, the boulevard rehearsed autumn. A lamplighter performed a service that electricity has not entirely stolen. Across the way, a worker pasted a fresh poster for the gallery. He took care over the accents. Poirot felt an absurd paternal satisfaction. "You knew from the start," Moreau said after a time. "The missing sugar." "From the start, I knew the case would depend on a small absence," Poirot replied. "Every crime does. A missing cone, a missing virtue, a missing humility. One finds the whole and then one asks which thread used to pass through it." "Do you pity the girl?" "I pity the arithmetic," Poirot said. "When affection is added to fear and subtracted from pride, the sum is often murder." Moreau made a face. "You're a poet when you're smug." I am Belgian when I am smug, Poirot corrected, smiling. He lifted his cup. To order and method. To the little grey cells, Moreau conceded, and touched cups. They were silent again. Poirot turned to you, as he sometimes did, in defiance of common sense, as if the fourth wall were only an invitation to better society. What detail would you have noticed at the end? The straightened poster? The return of sugar cubes where cones had caused trouble? The brandy that a sensible man drinks now without ornament? Or would you have noticed, as Poirot noticed, the mirror behind the counter where Paris arranged itself with almost innocent vanity, hats corrected, collars fingered, faces auditioned? He reached into his inner pocket and withdrew the brown paper twist of sugar crystals. He shook a pinch into his palm, admired their pointless beauty, and then emptied them into his coffee saucer. They made no sound dramatic enough for theatre, only a brief prickle like laughter overheard. "Madame," he called to Colette, "today I will take my chocolate sweetened." "Enfin," she said, delighted, and brought him a spoon. He stirred, lifted, tasted, and allowed the warmth to become part of his thinking. The case had ended not with a bang, but with an explanation. That was proper. Poirot believed in conclusions that tidied without pretending to purify. The world would dirty itself again before dusk. Across the boulevard, the poster hung perfectly straight. The little printer's boy had learned. Somewhere in a drawer at the Sûreté, a ledger slept. Somewhere in a cell, Iris Cabot wrote a first paragraph neither she nor anyone else would ever publish. It would begin, perhaps, "I did not come to Paris to kill a man, though I suspect Paris would still have offered me the opportunity." Poirot set down his cup and admired the crescent of chocolate left on the rim. Not milky, no sugar had been dipped and lifted away. The crescent was only the honest trace of a mouth. He approved. Honesty, after all, is merely accuracy ennobled. He stood, collected hat, settled moustache.
"Inspector," he said, "shall we walk?"
They stepped into the polite day. The air smelled of river and future. Poirot adjusted his gloves and addressed, one last time, the invisible pupil he imagined beside him. "Do not despise small things, mon ami. The world is a cathedral of little arches. Remove one, and the whole cannot carry its own weight. Observe the sugar. Observe the accent. Observe the habit. Then, if you must, pronounce." They crossed the boulevard with the grace of men who have forgiven traffic for existing. Montparnasse moved around them, alive, conspiratorial, magnificent in its insistence that secrets once told make room for new ones, and that, as Hercule Poirot would say, is enough.